It's been 3 years since the day of anger of the 25th of January 2011 in Egypt, when protests exploded on the streets of Cairo, Alexandria, Suez and Ismailia. The date was chosen by various opposition groups such as the 6th of April Youth Movement, We Are All Khalid Saeed Movement, National Association for Change and the 25th of January Movement and the Kifaya Movement. 3 years onwards, 5 people have been killed in 3 separate bomb attacks in Greater Cairo this Friday morning. Over these 3 years, the people of Egypt have lived through 3 different phases: Mubarak's 3-decade regime and Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood rule, and finally the interim rule under Adli Mansour. What has been achieved and what has not? And joining us today is political analyst and activist Carol Malouf. She was in Cairo exactly 3 years back, in the heart of the Egyptian revolution that ousted President Hosni Mubarak. Thanks very much for joining us today, Carol.
Thank you.
Carol, it's the 3rd anniversary of the revolution in Egypt, and you were there on the day. Can you take us back in time to that day on the 25th of January?
Yes, it was actually a very emotional revolution, if I may say. You would not feel any differences in classes, you wouldn't feel any religious differences on the streets. People came together as one to ask for the ousting of President Mubarak back then. And you feel the emotion towards the army as well. I remember people would bring flowers, bread, water for the soldiers. They would give their children to take some pictures on tanks, and it was they were celebrating the revolution as one, and you wouldn't even feel the difference between who was Christian, who was Muslim, who was from the upper class or lower class. They were just one hand that got together in one voice chanting for the change in the regime.
Can we compare it a little bit in that case when it comes to the Cedar Revolution of Lebanon after the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri?
It was very similar feeling indeed. It was very safe. I mean, I always said I was sitting in the middle of 1 million people in Tahrir Square, and you would feel that it was very safe. People would be singing and dancing and distributing food and sweets, just as the 2005 revolution in Lebanon.
Yes.
When people are united against one cause and one demand, their differences just disappear, and they're just chanting in one voice, asking for the exact same thing.
And what do you think has led Egypt today to bombs and attacks targeting minority groups recently, for example, the Copts of Egypt, and other attacks like the one we've seen today, obviously? What went wrong in these 3 years, in your opinion?
If I may say, there were a lot of mistakes that followed the ousting of Mubarak and the period after that. I mean, I personally believe that the Muslim Brotherhood was part of the revolution. They were democratically elected, but they did not rule democratically. They were not inclusive of all the denominations of the Egyptian society. They alienated a lot of people. And as you can see, even the Salafist party, An-Nur party, was not even part of the Muslim Brotherhood ruling clique or elite, if I may say. Now, in the Middle East, unfortunately, we haven't really learned to disagree democratically. So what is happening is, we saw what happened on the 30th of June when millions took to the streets calling for the removal of President Morsi. But the Muslim Brotherhood did not take it well, and they would not really listen to the calls of the opposition, which was the Salvation Front back then. They would not even listen to the calls made by the military to reconsider the referendum and the different constitutional reforms that were made that were really a bit unconstitutional, if we may say. So this led to resentment by the majority of the people, even the ones who had voted for the Muslim Brotherhood, felt that they, in a year's time, while the Muslim Brotherhood was in power, felt that they did not fulfill their promises. And the Muslim Brotherhood did not listen to the opposition, which led to the clashes, as we know, in Rabi'a.
Yes.
And violence breeds violence. And I think this is why we are here. They were not able to disagree democratically or to listen to each other, and they took it to the streets. And the bombings are a reaction to a series of violence that has been taking place since June 30th, and even before that, as we saw in Sinai and in other places.
Yes, Carol, when you were there in 2011, you just spoke about the political culture of the Egyptian people and how they failed to disagree democratically. I might have to disagree maybe or challenge your idea there about it. They did appear to be very democratic when they ousted President Hosni Mubarak. It was a lot of intelligentsia there. We saw women in democracy. We saw a lot of internet-fueled grouping of people to get into Tahrir Square, basically, so to mobilize the people. So basically, when you speak about internet, you talk about a lot of youth involved and academics and things like that. So under the Muslim Brotherhood, it was a little bit different. So can we say basically that the cultures are different? The people who ousted Mohammed Hosni Mubarak were different than the ones who support President Morsi in terms of their democratic culture?
I believe at this point it is fair to talk about the deep state and bring it into our conversation. The people in 2011 were really angry and very displeased with the internal security forces, with the crackdowns, with the intelligence, with the mukhabarat, across the board, with all the people that you have mentioned earlier. However, at this level, I believe that the deep state took part in this crackdown against the Muslim Brotherhood, and it was a lot of people from the Muslim Brotherhood side would say that they were reminded the times of Mubarak. So it's a cycle between. There are different elements taking place. There is the intelligentsia, there is the army, there's the deep state, and of course there were the Muslim Brotherhood. So the way they supposed to deal with each other, in my opinion, which was very democratic in 2011, and was also very democratic in June 30th of last year. Then after that, I believe things took a different turn. In terms of resentment against establishment, the deep state, the army, and some people perceive it as, the return of the deep state that was under Mubarak is now back under Sisi. However, there is the other point of view which says that, people were very displeased with the Muslim Brotherhood rule, and they just want to move on with a more secular referendum, as they have been saying over the last few weeks with the voting.
Yes. And Carol, even though we're sticking a bit to 2011, you mentioned something which is quite a bit paradoxical maybe, and we compared it to what happened in Lebanon, is the people collaborating with the army, offering them food and flowers and being nice to them. Yet at the same time there was anger, as you just said, with the mukhabarat and the pressure, the military state pressure that Hosni Mubarak imposed on the people. So it's a bit of a paradox, don't you think, back then?
Well, you see, in 2011, in Egypt, just like 2005 in Lebanon, the people were chanting that the people and the army are one hand, or in Arabic, الجيش والشعب إيد واحدة.
Yes.
So they were seen as the army protecting the people from the state apparatus and establishment.
Right.
However, this time, as I mentioned, it has been perceived differently, as if the state and the army were together against the Muslim Brotherhood. So the alliances if you want to have change.
Maybe for a
between
good
the
reason,
different,
though. Maybe for a
parties
good
at play.
reason, this alliance, don't you think?
I believe personally, my personal opinion, I believe the Muslim Brotherhood have made a few mistakes. They should have listened to the opposition. I do believe that the military stepped in, giving an ultimatum of 48 hours to President Morsi to go back on his different decisions regarding the constitution. And then the people with the Tamarrud movement took to the streets, the millions. So I believe this time the military also stepped in to protect the people one more time. This is my personal opinion.
Of course, and we do respect that. One more question, actually two more questions, if you don't mind. I have a question about the relation between today's blasts in Cairo and the new referendum. Do you see any relations there? Do you think some people were making a point?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Can you repeat it one more time?
Of course. I was asking about the referendum and today's blasts in Cairo.
Yes.
Do you see a relation? Do you see some parties in Egypt making a point by these acts by the blasts today?
I think it's been a series of events. I think it also coincides with the anniversary of the revolution. Today is the 24th of January. Tomorrow would be the day, the 25th of January anniversary. I think it was a clear message from the disenchantment of the Muslim Brotherhood and probably their supporters. I'm not accusing anyone here.
No, of course, we don't speculate, of course.
Message. Yes, there is definitely a clear message with, and I was checking social media since the morning of the Rabia supporters online, and you would hear a lot of people, saying, voicing their support of what is happening, unfortunately, and referring to the Copts as as traitors, and there is a lot of sectarian rhetoric today going on in Egypt, which you wouldn't really have heard of before the Muslim Brotherhood got into power, unfortunately.
So it's not particularly related to the new referendum, as in the Muslim Brotherhood opposing this referendum or anything like that. It's more about the 25th of January, the anniversary itself.
I think, you could say it's against this momentum. The referendum, the 25th of January, it's a momentum that has been created in Egypt, and I think this is definitely against that momentum.
And my last question, and back to Syria, we know also that you're humanitarian. You have some humanitarian activism, of course, when it comes to the refugees. It's nothing to do with Egypt, but it is something worth mentioning, especially given your expertise on the matter. Can you tell us more about the situation in the Lebanon within the Syrian refugee camps this winter?
Yes. Unfortunately, people only react when at times of crisis. Especially to the Syrian refugee issue, and we've seen a lot of movement along this line with the Alexa storm that was supposed to hit the region back in December. Now things have calmed down, but over the last month or so, the Lebanese had started becoming more aware of the Syrian crisis. Allow me to say there are officially and unofficially registered and unregistered around 1 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, a country of 4 million people. So you could imagine the exponential increase in population over 2 years. The Lebanese infrastructure cannot absorb this. The Lebanese society really cannot deal with this. And the government, as you know, with the current caretaker government, there is really no policy of dealing with the refugees. So this is affecting the refugees themselves and affecting the local population. We have stepped in as a civil society initiative to try to help with alleviating the suffering when it comes to the living conditions, medical support, heating, because most of these refugees whom we support live on the Syrian-Lebanese border in mountainous areas where it's quite cold.
Yes.
I mean, fortunately, we were able to create some awareness, and through social media and talk shows and word of mouth, people have become slightly more aware. They are participating in terms of civil society and trying to help by donating clothes, money, medicine, so on. Mm-hmm. But the problem is definitely bigger than any civil society initiative can, take care of. We need, the people need medical attention. They need, the children need education. We need more schools, more hospitals for chronic disease. Mm-hmm. So it's really a big problem.
Yes, and what about foreign NGOs, Carol? Do you mind me asking, what about the role of foreign NGOs on that matter when it comes to humanitarian relief in the Lebanon?
Can I be very honest?
Yes, please.
The problem is not with funding, it's with managing the funds. Mm-hmm. Because the government doesn't have a clear plan, so yes. What is happening is in certain places, the international organizations end up doubling the effort. And in other places, people are not getting any aid. So the international organizations need a mandate from the local government, from the Lebanese government, to have a set plan on how to deal with those refugees. So you find in certain places there is a lot of aid, and in other places there is not. So managing the funds and managing the international organizations in terms of giving the aid to the right people and the right place has been the challenge.
Are you saying here that the NGOs do not have necessary information on where to go with their aid? Is that the responsibility of the Lebanese government?
Yes, I mean, you would find that, I'll give you an example. There are families registered in a certain place with the UN. Mm-hmm. They move, let's say, from the border to Tripoli and without being traced or tracked. And they end up, for example, being registered in two places with two different organizations and getting aid from both.
Right.
So this doubling of efforts has gone to some people who are already getting aid, whereas the others are not. So this is just a simple example mm-hmm. of how this is being done. Had the government registered all the refugees in a single database mm-hmm. and had everybody access that database, then all the NGOs would have known where the aid is going.
That's really important. Thank you very much indeed, Carol, for joining us today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. That was the interesting Carol Malouf, also political communications consultant and lecturer in Middle East politics. And now let's move on to a small talk with Carmen. So Carmen, speaking about the Geneva II conference, which was the highlight of this week, we did have a caricature from the New York Times yesterday about the conference itself. So it was quite an interesting one there from the New York Times.
Yeah, so I've seen a little pigeon in the background. What do you think that signifies?
I think the pigeon actually could be anyone who's seeking reconciliation in the country, like for instance, Mother Agnes Mary of the Cross, trying to find a reconciliation element between the fighting rebels and the regime. It could be anyone who's trying to allow avenues for international foreign aid to the most vulnerable amongst the civilians suffering there. So
symbolizes the dove of peace.
Exactly, exactly.
Regarding Geneva II, I mean, what do you think it's achieved, if anything, and can you just give us a quick overview of the main parties?
For now, I think it did achieve a little bit of personality show, basically, sure. Particularly from Mr. John Kerry, US Foreign Secretary of State, and I think the star would have been Mr. Lavrov, who did challenge him indeed on his opinion, especially when it comes to including Iran in the talks. And of course, the other star would be Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Muallim, who challenged the UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon, asking for more time and telling him it's a big difference when it comes to being living in New York or living for 3 years in a conflict zone in Syria.
And who I believe has now threatened to quit the whole
He did threaten
process.
today, yes, he did indeed. So I think Mr. Muallim is threatening and is making a point there, but perhaps for a good reason, I think.
Do you think he's buying time, or something of that nature?
I wouldn't really comment on that. I wouldn't think it's buying time, but it's more making a point because the regime is a bit offended by the way they've been approached at Geneva too. There are always people, some sides think that it's all about the president's fate, President Bashar al-Assad's fate, while the most important issues to tackle are terrorism, like President Rouhani said, tackle terrorism in Syria, which might spread into the whole region. Yeah.
And then something else that took place was Davos.
Oh yes, Israel appears to be on the offensive when it comes to Iran. They don't want to see Rouhani have a voice like he did at Davos, especially when it comes to his the offensive charm in attracting investors into Iran. So certainly that did upset Israel.
Yeah, I mean, he spoke out at Davos to journalists, and he really wants to improve Western relations now that, you know, sanctions have been lifted slightly, and he wants to improve relations, and Israel really does not want to see that happen, and they've been very much on the offensive, saying he can't be trusted, his words can't be taken seriously. And the Jerusalem Post today actually featured a headline saying Netanyahu and Perez seek to derail Rouhani charm offensive at Davos, which clearly shows us how they feel. And Netanyahu said that Tehran remains aggressive, supports terror, participates in the slaughter in Syria, and is pursuing the development of ballistic missiles and plutonium for nuclear weapons. So Israel is clearly doesn't want to clear up relations with Iran at all.
Of course, we have to understand their attitude is a bit influenced by the Geneva deal with Iran, and they still perhaps, along with Saudi Arabia, they couldn't really digest what happened there, even though the deal is an interim 6 months deal, but you can tell Israel and Saudi Arabia are really not at ease with this deal.
They seemed bitter about the outcome of that deal.
It is, I do understand their opinion and their stance that like I said, they couldn't digest what happened. We also covered Turkey and Erdogan's chances in the upcoming election in March, where I had an interview with Mr. Göksel from Durham University, and where he discussed the chances of Mr. Erdogan's winning another term, even though constitutionally he has no right. But the upcoming municipal elections in March will determine basically if he still has his popularity, especially with the recent scandal in Turkey when it comes to this whole fraud case that was raised against him, and of course
what's gone on in Gezi Park and the protests.
Exactly, and this will affect Turkey, especially with its aspirations in joining the EU. So democracy has improved under Erdogan, but transparency has not improved at all. So
joining the EU is a big thing on the agenda for Turkey, isn't it? It's a big issue.
Of course, and transparency has to be achieved before any possible joining and being member of the EU. We also spoke yesterday about the Special Tribunal for Lebanon that had tried and actually offered a chance for the relatives of the victims to speak, which was a first perhaps when it comes to a tribunal of this volume, where I asked our interviewee yesterday at The Hague about it, and he said it is a first, but then they wanted to put a bit of a personal element and bring up, especially as an introduction. It was not the main highlight of the session yesterday, but it was quite a first when it comes to talking about the personal impact and the soft, or maybe the emotional impact on people who were left behind the assassination 9 years ago in central Beirut.
And he didn't seem to see any significance in the timing at all.
He didn't really, but he did not disagree that the timing could have been. He couldn't assert that it wasn't anything to do with pressuring Hezbollah today, especially when there is no government in Beirut yet. So. He said it was more a proceedings issue when it comes to giving, actually allowing more time for the Hezbollah accused parties to prepare themselves for the trial. So again, we cannot really speculate on that matter. So,
and I think the last piece is North Korea announced this morning that they'd landed a man on the sun.
A man on the sun. That's quite a first. That is news, really.
Yeah.
So on that note, we'll see you again next Monday for another press review.